right. So I'll be talking today about an issue that a lot of us have experienced and shared, especially at the meetup. Actually, on the April meetup a few months ago, Eric Brink gave a presentation on how to iterate towards Ember. His presentation was more focused around how do we move from a jQuery Rails style of application towards Ember. However, at the end of the presentation, there were a lot of questions about not so much how do we move to from jQuery to Ember, but more how do we move from, let's say, Ember 1.4 or Ember 1.6 to Ember VNext, or how do we move from Grunt or Ember Rails, and how do we move to Ember CLI? So it's something we actually went through at Practice Fusion. We have done it a couple of times, and the goal of this presentation is to share a bit about our experiences. Hopefully, we can save you some time once you're doing that, and maybe we could just give you some ideas on how to do it and inspire you to keep moving forward. So, so tonight I'll be talking on two main topics. One is how to move to Ember and how to move to Ember CLI. So you're probably thinking of moving to Ember 2.0 because we have been hearing a lot about all of the new features on 2.0. However, it's important to keep in mind that all of the features in Ember 2.0, they're actually today here in Ember 1.13, and that's actually our current stable version of Ember. So maybe if you're planning an upgrade, then Ember 1.13 could be your main focus. Also, Ember 2.0 will remove a lot of features and a lot of things that have been deprecated for a while. So the upgrade to Ember 2.0 will be slightly more challenging than a normal upgrade. But the Ember core team is planning to do patch releases of Ember 1. It will be 1.13.1, 0.2.3, and 1.13.x, and it will actually make our upgrade path to 2.0 simpler. They will be backporting some of the features of 2.1 and 2.2, so we are not going to be missing out. And at the same time, they will be adding deprecation warnings to make it easier for us to eventually upgrade once we are ready to do the final jump. But what I really want to talk and leave you with are some ideas on how can you define a process that will work for your organization, your team, the size of your app. So you can actually upgrade not only to an Ember 2.0, but how can you have a repeatable process to keep upgrading to any version of Ember. So the first option on how you will do it is you'll just go for it. Just open your Power.json, bump the version of Ember, point it to Ember 1.13, or if you're a bit more courageous, point it to Ember Beta or Canary, and then run Ember deploy commit to production. If that works, then that's great, and that should actually be your first option. However, for most of us, we need to do all of these things incrementally. The iconic Tom Dale said recently, our goal is that you can move your app to Ember 2.0 incrementally, one sprint at a time. Yeah, that's great. But how do we do it, Tom? Say the less iconic but slightly handsome, but more handsome Miguel Madero. So today we're answering that question. So in order to upgrade to 2.0 incrementally, you just need to go and read all of those blog posts. Once you're done with those, you will have to use all of those tools. Finally, you have to check all of the release notes, and those will keep growing once you get to Ember 2.0. Then check all of the change logs. And finally, but most importantly, check all of the deprecation warnings, because those are the ones that will help you to just do the right thing to make it easier to migrate to 2.0. So simple, right? I'm sort of half kidding with that. You will need those documents, and I'll leave you the links to all of those because you might actually need some of that. But the reality is that we can simplify all of these with a really basic cycle of 3 steps. So the first one is you need to start trying these things. One way of trying that will be to use a tool called Ember Try. Ember Try will actually modify your Bower.json, install whatever version of Ember or Ember data or any other Bower library that you want to use. And then we'll run any Ember command like Ember server or Ember test against those updated versions. And that will give you a lot of good feedback. You will know if your tests are passing, and you could actually run a Ember server and see the app in action and do some manual testing. And that's actually great for simple upgrades. If you need something more complicated, then this is actually what we're doing here. We have a custom set of branches and builds and deployments, and we're using Jenkins, and we are constantly promoting different versions. One is, that's the main one, that's the last one that we have in there. So we have what we're calling our Ember upgrade target. So that's the next version that we are aiming for. But then we're also building Ember Stable, Ember Canary, and Ember Beta, so we can actually get some feedback on what's 6 weeks, 12 weeks, and 24 weeks ahead for us. But then once you do that, on those custom builds and those custom deployments that you're doing, you will be able to run some test automation, obviously your unit test. You could be doing some manual testing, and you will be learning a lot from that. You will learn what's broken on your app, not only what the change log and the deprecation warnings are saying, but you will know what actually works and what doesn't. And then based on that, you will be able to create a plan to upgrade to the next version. So for us, once we learn and we gather all of that info, it has been useful to classify that in four different buckets. So we have this quadrant that we actually slice it. The first part is backwards compatible changes that are required. That's the main area of focus. Those are things that we could actually be doing today. Today here at Practice Fusion, we're on Ember 1.10. We're aiming to upgrade to Ember 112.1. And there are a lot of things that we could be doing today on our develop branch. An example of these types of changes, this is an old one, but HTML bars introduce some new constraints that require your HTML. Basically, it will crash if you had malform HTML, which previously handlebars didn't have that requirement. However, that's something that you could fix even if you were using, let's say, Ember 1.4. You could have fixed that instead of having to wait until you do the upgrade. So you want to fix all of those things as soon as possible, even before you really plan to move to the next step. Then we have some things that are also backwards compatible. You want to do them on your current version. But they're actually lower priority because they're only deprecation or they're optional changes. You eventually need to do them, especially if you want to target 2.0 in the short term. But they're lower priority in comparison to the third quadrant. That will be not backwards compatible changes, but that only work on your target version. An example of that have been some of the changes from Ember data that they changed some signatures, and you can only use the new signature if you're on the latest version. So you will actually have to do these types of changes on a separate branch. And then finally, we have things that are not backwards compatible and are optional. I'm leaving a lot of links on the presentation. So we have a lot of examples of all of these. We documented all of these categories for our upgrade to 110 and 112. So that's going to be all in the links. So once we do all of that, and we develop and we fix the items on our first quadrant and the third quadrant, then we are ready to play it by ear, and then we know if we are ready to do the upgrade. And if we are not, we simply wait for the next sprint. And I think that part of let's simply wait for the next sprint is super important for us because we are at the same time developing other features that are actually higher priority. And for those, sometimes we have fixed deadlines, sometimes we might have contractual obligations, some certification requirements, and those cannot really slip the release date. But an Ember upgrade, we could always move it to the next sprint. But the important part is that we could just make incremental progress and just get a step closer to the goal. So moving on to Ember CLI, we actually have the similar to two options. So we could just push and go through it, or we could do it incrementally. And that, again, depends on the size of your application and how your team is structured. Actually, for our component library that David was just talking about, we sort of accidentally just did it one day. Arnold, one of my colleagues, and I were just talking about the benefits of converting Tyrion into an Ember add-on. And we started hacking around. After a couple of hours, we got it sort of working, so we got excited, worked on it together for the rest of the afternoon, and then the next morning, we just had Tyrion running on our CLI. So definitely, if you can do something like that, that's definitely better, requires less coordination, but that's not always an option. So when that's not an option, and we actually tried to do it that way for our main application, and that was actually a total fail. We just couldn't get it to work because the code base was too large, and our main application was still using require.js instead of ES6 modules. And that was actually one of the main blockers for us when we tried to do it for the main application. So we say, okay, let's iterate towards this. We know we want to be on Ember CLI, so let's do it incrementally. And our first approach to do that was to modify our build process. We thought of extending Broccoli and extending Ember CLI to actually make it work with require.js. We surprisingly got it working all the way there, but our development build was 2 minutes. So every time we changed any file, we had to wait 2 minutes for the browser to refresh. So that was obviously not good, and we had to back off. And we decided to iterate, but this time we decided to iterate on a different direction. Instead of trying to mold or change our final destination to behave as our current state, we decided to change our current state to be more aligned to what our final state is. Meaning, instead of trying to make Ember CLI work with require.js, we needed to make our current state with grunt support ES6 and be closer to what Broccoli and Ember CLI are doing. And that's actually working great for us at the moment. So in order for us to be able to do that, we also had to extend the resolver. I'll leave you some links to that, so don't worry about typing all of this code. We are not in the 90s anymore. But there is a GIS there. You could just copy that. The idea is that we are using the same Ember resolver that Ember CLI is using, and then we extend it to support require.js while we are on this transitional state, just to support globals and support require.js. So with those pieces in place, not only we are getting closer to Ember CLI, but we are also getting some of the benefits of it already because we are able to use ES6 modules. So once we are done, we know what are the final steps because we did them a couple of times already. We already moved Tyrion, and we also moved a couple of other projects to Ember CLI. So we know the final steps that are required to do that. I have the list of all of those also in the presenter now. So just to summarize, keep in mind that I talked a lot about iteration, but how can we iterate towards these new versions? But the first option is just try to go for it. You might be surprised, as we were when we did it for Tyrion. It might just work. But you will never know unless you actually try it. So go tomorrow back to work and spend a couple of hours and give it a go. Maybe it will just work. And if it doesn't, then at least you would have learned something, and then you could iterate on that. And I'll also leave you a bunch of resources that you can actually read if you need some help on that. Thank you.